We have seen a storm of events happen over Ukraine within the last 24 hours. Without a doubt, the event that caught everybody's attention around the world and within Russia itself was the apparent mission kill of one of Russia's 3 Slava-class cruisers, the Moskva. So here is what happened. Yesterday, on April 13th, we got 2 very conflicting narratives as to what happened to this particular cruiser. The Ukrainian side claimed that they completely destroyed the ship with 2 Neptune-class anti-ship missiles. At the same time, the Russian side reported that something caused the ammunition on board the ship to blow up, and that this in turn resulted in a fire that could not be kept under control. I should note here that no explanation has as of yet been given by the Russian side as to what caused this ammunition to blow up. But in any case, several hours after the original report of a fire breaking out on board the ship, reports started to come in saying that all of the ship's crew have been evacuated, which, by the way, seems to suggest extensive damage that could not be brought under control by the ship's crew. It was also reported that the ship had started to list to one side. Now, as of several hours ago, as I am making this video, it is around 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Both the Russian Ministry of Defense and the Pentagon have confirmed that this ship has survived. Furthermore, it has been confirmed that this ship has made it back to its home port in the city of Sevastopol, and that it had apparently made this trip on its own power. Some very unconfirmed reports that are coming out from various sources suggest that there was a partial detonation of the ship's ammunition, particularly of its 130mm dual cannons, but that no other munitions were detonated. That is to say, the P-1000 anti-ship missiles, the S-300 missiles, the depth charges, torpedoes, etc., all of which are present on board the ship, have not been detonated. There are also reports, perhaps very optimistic reports I should highlight, that this ship can be repaired in about 30 days. Well, whether or not this is the case, we'll just have to wait and see. However, all of the mystery as to exactly how this ship was damaged still remains. When this news first surfaced, many people suspected that there was some sort of an attack, and of course, Ukrainian and Western media both fueled this hype. Many sources, primarily Ukrainian media, started claiming that the ship was destroyed by 2 Neptune-class anti-ship missiles. However, it needs to be said that the Neptune-class is not the most advanced anti-ship missile out there. It is, in terms of its technical specifications, roughly similar to the Soviet X-35 missile, as well as to the American Harpoon missile. Because of this fact, many people began to suspect if some Western country delivered more advanced anti-ship missiles to Ukraine, and Ukraine had used them to sink this ship. Or perhaps even some NATO country had directly made an attack against this cruiser. Another somewhat popular theory suggests that the damage was inflicted by one of the many naval mines which were set adrift in the Black Sea. Said naval mines had been previously spotted and filmed by the Turkish Coast Guard, an event which led to the closing of the Bosphorus Strait, and it's not impossible that one of these naval mines might have stumbled upon the Moskva cruiser. But given more recent evidence, it is my personal opinion that perhaps there may not have been any kind of attack at all. And for the record, I personally, as of right now, am split on this matter about 50-50. So the second theory is that there was some kind of critical systems failure that happened on board the ship. Perhaps something that is similar to what happened to the famous Russian submarine, the Kursk, over 20 years ago. That is to say, that a chronic lack of maintenance resulted in a critical systems failure, which led to this fire, which in the case of the Kursk submarine led to the vessel being sunk, but in the case of a surface ship had merely led to some damage and to the ship being put out of action. And here it should be noted that the Moskva cruiser was first commissioned 40 years ago. It is a very old ship. In fact, it is the first and oldest ship of its class. And on top of this, it is also apparently the least modernized ship of all of Russia's 3 Slava-class cruisers. Its 2 sister ships, the Marshal Ustinov and the Varyag, have apparently undergone much more thorough modernization over the years. And this is largely due to the fact that Russia's Black Sea Fleet is famously underfunded and is perhaps the most chronically underfunded of all of Russia's 5 regional fleets. And of course, on top of this, there is the fact that the Russian Navy is the most chronically underfunded branch of all of the Russian armed forces. So with all of this in mind, it is, in my opinion, not impossible that some ammunition on the ship had detonated prematurely when some weapon system was fired. However, as of right now, before we have had any kind of investigation, this is all merely speculation. All that we know for certain is that some kind of accident happened with this Slava-class cruiser, and that it led to the flagship of the Russian Black Sea Fleet being put out of action. And I should note here that because this ship is quite old and not so modernized, depending on the extent of the damage, which we will learn more about in the coming days, some have suggested that this ship may not be repaired at all, and that it will eventually be replaced as the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet by one of Russia's Ivan Rogov-class landing helicopter decks, which are currently under construction. But that, if it does happen, will be at the very least 5 years from now. So, at the end of the day, no matter how one looks at this is a massive, massive blunder. This is a massive PR defeat for the Russian military. One of the heaviest missile ships in the entire Russian Navy and the flagship of a regional fleet got disabled. It was mission killed and it was nearly sunk. So while there is no doubt that this is a big morale victory for Ukraine, one must also note that this will have a minimal, if any, effect as to the situation on the ground. Of course, this is mainly because of the fact that ships don't tend to participate in land combat. There are ships which carry land attack cruise missiles, but the Moskva cruiser is not one of them. The 16 supersonic anti-ship missiles, which are carried by ships of this class, don't have the range to make them viable land attack missiles, and are, at the end of the day, simply too large and too expensive for the task. And as far as the radar and radio electronic warfare installations that this ship carries, well, those aren't as modern as those of its sister ships. I would wager, though I admittedly do not have any solid confirmation of this, that Russia's 3 Admiral Grigorovich-class frigates, which are also part of the Black Sea Fleet, and are all modern vessels that were constructed within the last 6 years, would have at least comparable capabilities when it comes to radar surveillance, possibly even superior capabilities, despite the fact that these ships are, of course, only about 1/3 of the size. But that isn't to mention the fact that many other ships from all of Russia's regional fleets are currently in the Black Sea as well. So the loss of this cruiser, while it is very significant from a morale perspective, will at the end of the day do very little to affect Russia's overall naval capability in the region, and will have even less of an effect on the ground fighting. Though perhaps the fact that something like this was allowed to happen, despite numerous military exercises involving this ship, the last of which, by the way, happened in February, just a few weeks before this war, should perhaps be taken as a sign that not everything is going well within the Russian Navy, especially when it comes to the Black Sea Fleet. Because at the end of the day, my personal opinion is that no matter how many excuses and mitigating factors there are, which, to be fair, there are many, none of them ultimately excuse the fact that a flagship of a whole regional fleet was lost during military operations against a country which has almost no anti-ship capabilities. So no matter how you look at this, someone definitely screwed up. Anyways, moving on to the next topic. It was reported that a small village, which lies about 10 kilometers from the Russian-Ukrainian border on the Russian side, in Bryansk Oblast, was shot by a Ukrainian helicopter which fired 6 missiles towards the village. And it is reported that as a result, 8 Russian civilians, including a pregnant woman, have suffered injuries. 2 of them apparently in critical condition. Within several hours of this event, there was also some shelling from Ukrainian mortars targeting neighboring villages in the Belgorod Oblast. And frankly, here we see the same Ukrainian tactic that was being used against the Donbass for 8 years, targeting civilian population centers, towns, villages, which have no military targets within dozens and dozens of kilometers. And as I explained previously, Ukraine is doing this to divert Russian attention, including the attention of Russian soldiers, from the imminent battle that is going to take place in the Donbass. The more Ukraine terrorizes Russian civilians and bombards Russian territory, the more Russian forces Russia will have to redirect to defend these areas. And of course, all of these forces will ultimately all be redirected away from the Donbass offensive. This comes exactly 2 days after Ukrainian President Zelensky issued orders to the Ukrainian military to attack Russian targets on Russian land. But even more interesting is the fact that this comes on the very next day after the Russian Ministry of Defense warned Ukrainian government officials that if any attacks were made on Russian territory, then Russia would start targeting the decision-making centers in Ukraine, i.e. the Ukrainian parliament building, which is the Rada. Here I will remind everybody that contrary to the brain-dead claims of Western media, Russia has done very little to target any civilian infrastructure in Ukraine, and has even withheld from airstriking the Ukrainian parliament building, even though its abilities to do so are very much present. Every single day, the Russian Navy and Russian Air Force continue launching long-range cruise missiles to strike at various ammunition depots, airfields, and command centers in Ukraine. And one other small bit of news which came out today is the fact that during a naval exercise in the Baltic Sea, as well as in the Pacific Ocean, that is to say, in both of these exercises, which took place on the same day, Caliber cruise missiles were fired. And the fact that Russia is using these missiles for naval exercises, even as there is a war going on, clearly indicates that Russia's stores of these missiles are nowhere near being depleted. So Russia definitely has the ability to strike the Ukrainian Rada, as well as many other government buildings anywhere in Ukraine, and not just by using cruise missiles. So Russia warned the Ukrainian government that if there were any attacks on Russian soil, then Ukrainian decision-making centers would be targeted in retaliation. And if you think about this, this is just standard practice in war. Russia has not, up until now, even attempted to perform any kind of decapitation strike on the Ukrainian government. But after its warnings not to attack Russian soil directly were clearly and very demonstratively ignored, we might very well see some attempt at a decapitation strike within the next few days, possibly. In any case, it is clear that this war, which started out on a very limited scale, is clearly escalating. And now, moving on to the last bit of interesting news today, we are hearing a lot of the G word being thrown around, both by Ukraine and by its Western backers. Although, to be fair, Russia has also used and perhaps somewhat misused this word to justify some of its reasons for going to war with Ukraine. Although I would argue that in Russia's case, there is at least a little bit of logic and a somewhat understandable reason for why this word is being used, even though it is still, in my opinion, somewhat misused. And by the way, that reason is the death of about 15,000 civilians in the Donbass over 8 years of shelling, as well as the deaths of many thousands more during the fighting. After all, such civilian population centers were targeted on purpose by the armed forces of Ukraine. And I am, of course, referring to the wonderful word which Western mainstream media has popularized so much recently after misusing it so many times, which is genocide. Both US President Joe Biden and Victoria Nuland have stated that Russia is committing a genocide in Ukraine, and particularly from Joe Biden, it is interesting to note that this comes just 1 week after he said very clearly and unmistakably, after being asked a question from a journalist, that what Russia is doing in Ukraine is clearly not a genocide. So apparently, after 1 week has passed, Joe Biden has suddenly changed his mind on the matter. And today there was also a law passed by the Ukrainian Rada, which recognizes this war as a genocide made by Russia against the Ukrainian people. And I simply don't know what to say about this. This is so ridiculous. This is a whole other level of clown world. These pipsqueak politicians in the Ukrainian Rada, which are allowed by Russia to make all of these statements, who are permitted to continue exactly the same things that they are used to doing, without being impeded in any way, shape, or form, without being targeted by Russian long-range missiles or clusters of thermobaric warheads. These utter clowns, who Russia could easily wipe out at any hour if it so wished to, are saying with a completely straight face that Russia is committing a genocide. All that I will say about this claim is that the Russian high-powered aviation vacuum bomb, which is to say the father of all bombs, has a blast yield equivalent to 44 tons of TNT. That is, a conventional weapon which has an explosive yield equivalent to that of a very small nuke. Such a bomb would guarantee that everybody within a few hundred meters would be killed, and some people out towards a kilometer or perhaps even more would also suffer perhaps fatal injuries. And yet, I haven't seen any of these bombs dropped anywhere on Ukraine even once, let alone being dropped in clusters by strategic bombers on Ukrainian cities, even though Russia has every physical capability to do so. And one very last small bit of news is that Google AdSense has disabled monetization on YouTube for any channels that remotely talk about the Ukraine war and do not support Washington's party line. But of course, if you do support Washington's party line, if you make videos every day talking about how the Ukrainians are all fluffy angels and how the Russians are all evil genocidal war criminals, then your YouTube channel does get to keep all of its monetization. And you can make a lot of money by shilling for the United States government. Now, personally, I do not care too much about this because I am not running my YouTube channel for money. The only reason why I am somewhat worried about this, although I am in no way surprised whatsoever, is that this bit of news is just the beginning. We are on a censorship escalator. And I fully accept the fact that sooner or later this channel, as well as many other channels that do not agree with the mainstream political narratives of the West, will get censored and removed from YouTube. And in light of this, I would like to tell everybody to check out an alternative platform to YouTube, which is called Rumble. Now, to people who have been watching my videos for some time, as well as to people who are watching this video on Rumble, well, first of all, I thank you and applaud you. But to everybody, I would like to say that when I first made this channel, when I first started uploading my videos onto Rumble, I merely viewed Rumble as some sort of desperate situation backup platform and in no way a serious competitor to YouTube. But I am beginning to change my mind. The main advantage that Rumble has over YouTube is that it is, of course, free of political censorship. Of course, this is something that many video hosting platforms over the internet can claim. However, the main problem that all of these platforms have is that they have an extremely small user base. However, after doing a bit of basic digging and research, I have realized that Rumble's user base is far from tiny. With 44 million monthly visitors as of the beginning of this year, Rumble has a user base that is roughly 2% of YouTube's overall user base. Now, this might seem like a tiny number, but at the end of the day, it is 2% of a monopoly. And this 2% is going to rise very quickly, very soon. And it's going to rise because the censorship that we see from Western big tech companies is only going to increase as the war for Ukraine intensifies and as the economic and political situation in the Western establishment becomes more desperate. So I say with some confidence that very soon Rumble is going to be a very viable alternative to YouTube. And I invite everybody to check out this platform and to check out my channel on Rumble, the link to which will be in the video description. I also run a Telegram channel where you can find updates for all of my videos, as well as some small posts discussing recent events. The link to that will also be in the video description. With that said, thank you all for listening, and I wish you a wonderful day.